Hey everybody, what you're about to see is one of my favorite interviews I've ever done. I hope you like it as much as I enjoy doing it. Before we dive in, please take a minute and check out the link you see on your screen, fool.com/Frankel. You get the top 10 stocks to buy right now from my sponsor, The Motley Fool. It's the best way to support this work we're doing on YouTube. Again, that link is fool.com/Frankel. Enjoy. Hey everybody, today is a special edition on our channel. We are joined by Gary Kusin, who has a really interesting resume, actually. Gary was a co-founder of GameStop, although it wasn't called GameStop back then. We'll get into that in just a minute. He was also the former CEO of Kinkos, and I could go on and on and on, but I want to actually get to talking to Gary. So, Gary, thank you for joining us today.
You bet. Glad to be here.
So, I guess let's get started. I mentioned you're the co-founder of GameStop. Can you kind of talk about take us back in time because that was a while ago.
Sure.
I remember the original name, but kind of tell us what inspired you to start GameStop. Like, what need did you see in the market?
Right. Good question. So you got to dial back to 1983. And in fact, what I'm going to tell you is this wasn't a couple of guys just decided, oh, what the heck, let's sell software that's in baggies. My partner and I had gone to graduate school together. He had finished very near the top of the class, and I was the bookend to that at our business school. Because he was finished at the top of the class, he went to Bain and was a partner at Bain ultimately. I went into the department store business, which was where I was. I was the senior merchant of a division of Macy's. Uh, when we got together, we put our heads together. He his background, he had replanted himself as the Bain partner in the Silicon Valley at the dawn of Silicon Valley, frankly. And his first couple of accounts were video game publishers, particularly Activision. And during the course of his involvement in helping Activision think about their video game strategy, he developed a very strong point of view that the video game industry was going to explode. Just to back up, our first store, and I'll tell you why it was named Babbage's, but the first store we opened was the first store in the world that sold video games. So we weren't just at the leading edge, we were at the bleeding edge. In my time in department stores, I had developed a point of view. This was when enclosed malls were starting, and we were watching a bunch of specialty stores essentially take our lunch in the department stores. And I developed a point of view that said in any category of consumer goods that reaches a measurable size, the specialty store channel becomes an important, if not dominant, channel in distribution. When Jim happened to come through Dallas and meet with me and we had dinner, he started showing me penetration curves of hardware going all the way back to black and white TVs, phonographs, and in everything that he went to, ultimately the content, the software on those hardware types, if you will, became huge. And people want to entertain themselves. And when he did penetration curves, they all looked like hockey sticks, going back to the 1930s in black and white TV, to color TV, to literally phonographs, to stereos, and every one of them had an advent of content, whether it was a studio in Los Angeles or whether it was a store called Sound Warehouse selling records. And he was telling me about the imminent growth of video game systems and computers used in the home. And I stopped him and said, well, let me tell you something. A specialty store channel will emerge that will become the dominant retailer of video games and personal computer software used in the home. And if we want to get a first mover advantage, you ought to quit your job at Bain. I ought to quit my job at Macy's, and we ought to start consciously thinking about how are we going to get first mover advantage before people knew what first mover advantage was in the video game selling era. And that's what we did. So it was a calculated bet. It was a risk for sure, but we learned the business before anyone else could spell it. use the word software because in 1983, if you talked about software, people thought that was women's intimate apparel. They simply didn't know what software was, seriously. And we didn't ever, there were every mall in America had game peddler, game time, games, and we needed to distinguish ourselves from everyone that were called games. And the way we stumbled onto it is uh, we learned about the history of computers and a man named Charles Babbage, who essentially invented the first computer, called the analytic engine, in the 1860s in Victorian England. And we were looking for something that wouldn't scare people away from walking into our stores. So we made a big deal. We called it Babbage's. We put a big plaque up with his picture. He was married to Lord Byron's daughter. I mean, it was all that kind of stuff to ensure that people would just come in and look at the video games. And that's how we started.
I really love that story because I remember as a child going to the Babbages in the Morristown Mall in New Jersey,
Yep.
and my father was a computer engineer, and asking him why it was called Babbages, and he had no idea. So now I just learned something that I asked 35 years ago.
Well,
Uh,
he also invented things like the cow catcher on the front of trains. He was a 19th century entrepreneur and mathematician in Victorian England. He developed a bunch of crazy stuff, and his girlfriend invented the software. It was the first punch cards, and her name was Lady Ada Lovelace. And in World War II, the United States government, as they were developing computers, the software program they developed was called Ada,
huh,
in tipping their hat to Lady Ada Lovelace, who invented the punch cards that went on Charles Babbage's difference engine.
wow. So,
A little history there.
so, see that's beyond what's in your book. Speaking of the book, I want to kind of pivot to that a little bit. So you just wrote a book. It's called "Always Learning: Lessons on Leveling Up from GameStop to Laura Mercier and Beyond." So
Yes,
your journey has been a very interesting one. Um, a lot of the iconic brands that I used to, visit as a younger person, um, and it's really interesting to me that the Kinko story is really interesting. I mean, I remember going to Kinko's to make copies, and at the time, I never thought it was of it as a shipping
sure.
company. So one thing I wanted to, while we're on that topic, so you were CEO of Kinko's when they were acquired by FedEx, correct?
Yep. Fred Smith walked into my office and we did the deal together. And then
Eh,
I reported to him for 2 years, integrating Kinko's into FedEx. So it was a Fred Smith deal, and I was the guy at the time.
So when you took over as CEO of Kinko's, did you see it as something that would be work better as part of a bigger system, or was that just a complete
No, we
surprise?
didn't understand what FedEx knew. So I was fully committed to turning Kinko's around. It was in very serious trouble. The viability of the enterprise was actually in danger. So we worked and developed a turnaround plan, which resulted in us going from a loss to, in our first 12 months, to 120 million of EBITDA. Second 12 months, 180 million of EBITDA, and in year three, we were cruising towards 240 million of EBITDA when Fred Smith walked into the office. Here's what Fred knew that we didn't know. We all know that they are incredibly competitive with UPS stores. At the time that he walked into my office, they had 1,000 staffed package acceptance counters in the United States where people could go in and drop off a package for FedEx, and FedEx would take it. It would immediately go in the system. Of those 1,000 US locations, 500 of them were inside of our Kinko stores. They they paid us rent. It became an amenity, as far as we were concerned, an amenity for our customers, a convenience, and another reason they might want to come in besides making copies, maybe send things on FedEx. What Fred told me when he came in, he said, and I'll paraphrase it, he said, you've got 500 of our 1,000 locations. Your worst location of your 500 ranks as our number 500 of our locations, you blow away every other counter that we have. People love your stores. They love the convenience of it. And we weren't offering packaging at the time. And he said, we know that if we could introduce other FedEx services, they'd be highly complementary with your copy and print business. And that's how we moved into a discussion that resulted in us shaking hands on a deal in that very same first meeting within 10 minutes of him sitting down. Uh, quite a guy, quite a guy.
So in your book, you talk about developing a sixth sense for finding opportunities. Um, I have to believe that the GameStop, your introduction to GameStop, your experience at Kinko's had something to do with developing yours.
Of course.
If you were going to talk to somebody maybe in their 20s or 30s who is just getting started today, how would you tell them to go about finding their sixth sense?
Sure. That's a great question. Well, and also, let's not leave out Laura Mercier. Laura Mercier was a cosmetics startup that I co-founded, that is still today a global beauty brand. So, in every instance, whether it was Babbage's slash GameStop or Laura Mercier, or actually understanding companies like Kinko's, to me, there's kind of I have two messages from my experience. One is passion. I think passion is overrated. Okay. When people are thinking about, there are a lot of people out there that tell young people, find something you're passionate about. Well, you know what? The guys who founded US Steel probably weren't passionate about steel. And I can run right down the list of some of the greatest industrial companies the world has ever seen. People weren't passionate about that. They had a reasoned investment thesis. I'm not a gamer, nor was my partner. Now, I've learned to be a gamer and loved it, but that wasn't what drove us there. It was Jim, the penetration curve, and we knew the power of semiconductor chips from Moore's law, combined with what we knew about specialty store retailing. We developed an investment thesis. Laura Mercier, I developed an investment thesis, which is a fact set that suggests that if these facts are true, then this next thing ought to be true also, which might lead you towards starting to provide something of value that isn't otherwise being provided in the marketplace. So I think my main message is be analytical, be thoughtful, learn about everything that you can before, so that you can make the most reasoned analytical decision that you can make. And I don't hear as much of that in pedagogy, in the way people try to tell young people about how they might want to go into business or be an entrepreneur. I hear less of that than to find something you love and get in there and do it. I don't agree with that particularly.
Yeah, I mean, of course, if you love something and it checks all the other boxes, then great.
That's awesome. God, no, that's awesome.
But you
That's
make a great point. Who's passionate about steel and
Yeah,
who's
yeah.
um, okay. So far we've talked about all your successes in business, but even the best, we never get it right 100% of the time. So one of the things I always like to ask people I'm interviewing is, can you tell us about one of your biggest mistakes in business and maybe a lesson or two that you learned from it?
Sure. Well, there are a couple. One I'll give you in hindsight, okay, and it has to do with GameStop, frankly. We bought our biggest competitor. It was Software Etc. at the time, ended up becoming a merger of equals where they shut down where they were based up in Minneapolis, moved their operations, and we merged them all together in Dallas. And it was shortly after that I went to start my cosmetics company. But their biggest drawback, they hated the name Babbage's, and they said, we'll do this thing, but you got to change the name. We don't want to be called Babbage's. And we said, that's great, because we don't want to be called Software Etc. either. So we'll come up with a new name. And their owner at that time was a guy named Lynn Riggio, who owned Barnes and Noble. He knew the founder and had bought a company called Bookstop that we knew well from Texas. He started it in Austin, a guy named Jay Hoover. And Len thought, well, gee, maybe a good name since he already owned the rights to Bookstop and the icon that was a stop sign that said Bookstop on it. Maybe we should call this company GameStop, which we all agreed, everybody agreed to, and then we moved forward. But Jim and I had a couple of big premises when we started GameStop that changed. The fact set 13, 14 years later was not the same as when we started. And we missed both of those, which is a shame on us. But we were a mall-based specialty retailer. Between over the 12 to 15 years after we started, a new real estate opportunity emerged. These power centers, which were out in the open, had Best Buy as an anchor or Office Depot as an anchor, other than like a major regional mall. If we would have seen that, and we should have seen that, we could have migrated to strip centers even faster, lowered our CapEx that was required to open in a mall because malls had all sorts of design requirements, lowered our break-even price, and it would have been hugely helpful. So that's one thing. The other thing, we had predicted and projected that the price for a video game would drop over time to become more in the reach of the average customer, and that it should get down to something like $19.99. Well, 12 or 15 years later, they were the same price they were when we got there. Now, given inflation and all, you could argue that price was lower, but it was still a $49.95 kind of retail price. We had played with the idea of doing trade-ins and having a used market, and we'd in fact met a guy in Minneapolis who owned a company called Funko Land, and we talked about buying him, but not because we were 100% convinced that what he was onto was right, but he was a company we could buy. He wanted $5 million and wasn't even doing $100,000, and we thought it was crazy. 10 years later, of course, GameStop bought him for $100 million, and it became the used video game business, became $500 million worth of their bottom line at GameStop in the later years. Jim and I missed both of those. So that's a miss. The other thing that I missed along in my career, and this all has to do with people, but I have come to appreciate the power of a very good senior team. I was very good at saying, way to go, to frontline people in the company. Lots of rewards and recognition. We did a 360 review process at Kinkos, and I learned that for my direct reports, I scored about as bad as you can score on rewards and recognition. And I confronted them and said, look, what's going on here, guys? I thought I did a good job of that. And they said, you do, with the people who report to us and the people that report to them and on down into the company. But you don't say way to go to any of us. I didn't think that was important. This whole room was full of 6- and 7-figure a year kinds of senior executives. We were all highly competent, and I didn't think I needed anyone to tell me way to go, and I figured they didn't either. I was wrong. Everyone needs to be told they're doing a good job when they're doing a good job. Everyone needs reinforcement for good behaviors, even senior officers of a corporation. And that was the biggest, best learning. And it was a mistake it was literally a mistake in my management toolkit, if you will, to think that, oh, they don't need it. I'm not going to go out of my way to give the love to my direct reports the way I did deeper into a company. And even though that may not be what you're looking for, that was overweighted in the big scheme of tools that you can use to develop a more highly functioning senior team. So it took me deep into my career before I figured that out.
All right. So thanks for sharing those. I want to briefly touch on one thing before I get to a little bit
Yeah.
more of the book. I definitely want to get to the book, but one more thing before that. If you look at internet search volume for GameStop. It trends steadily downward till about late 2020, and then something happened where interest went straight up, and you probably know what I'm talking about. So
Yep.
GameStop was the center of the meme stock frenzy. Now
Well, they were the first
they were the
meme
first.
stock
Yeah, I guess
frenzy.
that's fair. They weren't the first. There were other companies that got caught up in that business as well.
Yeah, but later, I think, right?
Right.
The one that became front page headlines globally was
Yes, and I'm pretty
GameStop.
sure that's the only one they've
Yeah,
made a movie about so far.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so it was obviously the center of the meme stock frenzy, at least at first, like you
Sure.
just said. Um, so one of the most common questions I was getting around that time, because I'm a value investor at heart. You know, I don't do
Yeah,
bubbles. I don't do expensive companies, anything like that.
right.
How can we tell the difference if something's a true, momentum rally, like you see real momentum there, and it's a business with legs and things like that, between that and just a frenzy or a bubble or something like that? I was curious to get your opinion on that.
Sure, sure. And Jim and I decided as soon as that started happening that we would not talk to anybody. That did not stop reporters globally. I was getting calls in languages I couldn't figure out what they were.
I'm sure.
Uh, uh, and Jim and I knew instantly and immediately what caused the meme, to what caused it to be different than everything else, and no one ever got it right. And I'm happy to share that. I am happy to share that with you. This whole notion of companies over the last decade about, oh, we want our customers to be fans. We want them to, we all that kind of happy talk. The fact is that when we started Babbage's and it carried through GameStop, we were part of the fabric of the teenagers' lives that were buying video games. We were as important to them as anything in their lives. They lived, ate, drank, and breathed GameStop air. I mean, that is at midnight. How else can you explain at midnight being able to sell 1 million video games between midnight and 3 in the morning? You had teenage boys with one of their parents with them, because late at night, waiting their turn to buy a hot game. That creates something so much deeper in a generation of people. So you end up, go 20 years fast forward to 2020, you have people who are 30 or 40, in their 30s or 40s, who measured time in their life by the release of a video game. So they could tell you, yeah, I bought World of Warcraft in 2003. I bought it at the GameStop in Mill Valley. And, I mean, that's how they measure their lives. So all of a sudden, now imagine legions, and these people all were on Reddit. My son was a Redditor, and they didn't know who he was, but he loved priming the pump. He loved all of this kind of stuff. But now imagine those people hearing that some Wall Street financiers are trying to kill their company, the company that was part of their life. It was part of their DNA. This is no casual relationship. And it was truly, oh, they think, and on Reddit, they started talking, can you believe what they're trying to do to GameStop? And it was truly the energy of a generation or two of incredible fans who did measure their life, who are groupies till now, saying, we're not going to let those sons of bitches take our company down. Because if you looked at the economics, it's not hard to see that it's like Blockbuster. People are going to be getting their games. They're going to be downloading their games. The whole GameStop premise was definitely going away. The same way Blockbuster did. The same way anything does that's part of the digital universe, sooner or later, they'd have to rescale it. That didn't matter. It was the offense that 20 or 30 years worth of loyal customers took at Wall Street messing with their memories. And that's what did it. And I'm telling you, Jim and I saw that come because we started with the card at Babbage's. And when you get your 10th punch, you get a free piece of software. And we watched people, they way outweighed the value of that card because it was the experience. we didn't hire people to work in our stores unless they were big time gamers. So anyone who wanted to walk through the door could actually have a mind meld with a GameStop employee who knew the games backwards and forwards. And the market knew that because they gave free games to our employees because they knew our people were real gamers. And so that's what started. It took the historical best customers of GameStop to rally, to get mad, to create what is now known as a meme stock. And then they took it. Meme stocks have gone into other things where you can, as an investor, you can look at them and maybe they're in the gray area or not. But with GameStop, there was no question. It's what it was. It can't be any longer with the advent of digital capability to download things in memory and speed, all that kind of stuff. It was bound to happen. And I didn't think it was a bad move when it was being shorted. It's to me, it was kind of an obvious move. But the meme thing, I did enjoy watching.
Yeah, it's what makes shorting stocks so difficult. is
Yep.
it can go the wrong way very easily, no matter how much it makes sense.
Yep. Yeah.
Um,
You're right.
all right, so let's get to the book. I know we're running a little short on time. Book is called "Always Learning: Lessons on Leveling Up from GameStop to Lori Mercier and Beyond." Um, so, can you? I don't want you to give away too much. I want everybody to read the book. But
Sure.
I'm wondering if you could share maybe a little bit of your favorite story. I know there was one about Kinko's involvement in 9/11, which was a really interesting story. Is that your favorite one, or is there another one from the book that you would?
That's the most surprising one to people who read the book because I couldn't talk about it when it was going on. We were completely we were shut down from even talking to anyone about that because it was so highly sensitive. So yeah, I love that one. One of these days though, where my heart is, the Kinko's turnaround is a master class for CEOs, for MBA program, all it. And so I love that. I won't talk about that. I will just for the purposes of this, just a little nugget or two on 9/11. So on 9/11, I had just completed touring 42 regions in the US and having town halls across all shifts in each market, and had called together our top 150 people to meet in Denver for me to go over. Look, here's the way we're going to go forward with this thing. And the date I called, and everyone came from all over the country, was September 11th, 2001. So we're sitting there eating breakfast, and I'm like, we're all like everyone else in America, and we started getting this news, and finally had the oh my gosh, this is a real deal moment. Within an hour and a half, our head of people came to me and he said, we got a store manager in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He needs to speak to you. He won't speak to anybody else. And it is the matter of the utmost urgency. And so I said, wow, well, let's go out in the hall, see what's on his mind. And he said, uh, I didn't think anything about what I'm about to tell you that happened 3 weeks ago, but watching this morning, I need to tell you. And I said, what's that? He said he was working the overnight shift 3 weeks prior, and four guys came in trying to burn CDs. And the CD burner at that time was broken. And so they couldn't burn it, and they seemed to be upset. And he said, look, I'm about to get off. I'm the manager of the store. I can take your CD and burn copies at my house on my computer and bring it back, and you can pick them up tomorrow. And they said, would you mind? And he said, no. And he did it. He went home, made them copies, and they showed up the next day, gave it to him. He said, I didn't think anything about it until this morning, but those CDs were the schematics for American Airlines 757 airplanes, including seating charts and way more material on how those planes work than probably should have been on a CD. And I had a oh no moment. And so I'm calling to tell you. And he also said, and oh, by the way, I met you when you were here, and I really think we're onto something here about turning it around. So I appreciate you taking my call. So I say thank you, stay where you are, and let us call you back. So I looked at my head of people and said, whoa, now what do we do? Who do we call now? And as it happens, his wife's uncle reported directly to Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld in Washington, D.C., and he said, I'm going to call my uncle. And he called his uncle, who immediately got on the phone, and he told him the story, and he said, wait a second. And a minute later, I was talking with Rumsfeld, Secretary Rumsfeld, on the phone, and he said, I have some very specific questions to ask you. First, are there video cameras in the store? I didn't even know the answer. I'd only been in the company for 3.5 months, but Paul knew. He was standing there. He said, yeah, we have video cameras. And he said, are all of your computers tied into a your network operations centers? Yes. And are they timestamps synced between your video cameras and the scene? Every store had 12 video cameras monitoring every area of the store. Are they synced to the cash registers? And the answer was yes. And he said, okay, we need to go through every bit of the tape that you have on that store. I'm going to send a bunch of people from the FBI over immediately, and they're going to pour over the videos. Within an hour, they had seen and had the faces of the terrorists, and they saw them sitting at the rental computers and doing a lot of things that they could go, and because there's stroke counters in the operations center, we could tell by the timestamp and by which rental computer we saw what each one of them was typing. And we learned by going back to that time, they were buying their tickets on the airplanes that were involved. They were communicating with other cells of other terrorists, all of which we were able to show the government. And no one could know about this because there were only 4 people in all of Kinkos that knew about this. But at one point, we had over 50 FBI agents disguised as Kinko's employees. And there are a lot more details around this, but they literally knew. And if anyone in the American public, I was shocked the next day to see how quickly they could pull our footage, match it with airport footage, and be able to show the people that had been in our stores going through security in the airports. And it was, those photos were all over the world, and the U.S. government found all of them due to Kinkos. And we ended up providing all the copy equipment at ground zero. We ended up working closely with the government forever. And they were able subsequently to find many of the top 10 most wanted people in the U.S. by knowing which websites they frequented. We could make note of it in our network operations center. And if anyone in any computer of our 12,000 rental computers in the system hit that website, it would pop up in the network operations center down to, okay, it's this location in Dayton, Ohio. They would have people go and arrest people. It's amazing. So anyway, but we felt very good about that.
So, GameStop is the headline in the book. That's, it's right. It's mentioned right in the title. But
Yeah.
I gotta say, the Kinko stories are are a lot of the meat of the book. I mean, it's like you
Yeah.
said, the turnaround itself is a masterclass in how to turn a
Yeah.
business around. The Kinko stories alone are worth a read. So, Gary, thank you for joining us. I won't take up any more of your time.
You bet.
Again, the book is called Always Learning Lessons on Leveling Up from GameStop to Laurier Mercier and Beyond. Um, I highly encourage you to give it a read. If full of fascinating stories. Gary, again, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thank you.
I want to thank The Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. The Motley Fool is a company that provides investing insight and stock recommendations for investors of all skill sets and risk levels. You all know how much I love researching new stocks and trying to find the next best investment, so I'm proud to partner with The Motley Fool to bring you 10 stock picks from their popular product, Stock Advisor. Stock Advisor has beaten the market by more than 4 times, so go to fool.com/Frankel to get your 10 stock picks now. The Motley Fool Stock Advisor returns are 650% as of April 16th, 2024, and are measured against the S&P 500 returns of 148% as of April 16th, 2024.